This is the most interesting topic in the whole section. This is what I'm interested in. Now, I hope everyone else is too. I find this one of the great questions in life is this whole concept of leadership. And tonight and next week, we're talking about topic 4. Okay, so we're going to do part A tonight, part B next week. This whole concept of leadership is a real struggle because it's so important that people be good leaders. Yet the problem is that most people are awful at it. Okay, so it's important and it's not done very well. These are two of the big things that pull on how we can succeed in this world as business people, or how we can succeed in this world in our work, or anything like that. We need really to do a much better job at exercising leadership in a productive way. And as we see in politics these days, that's very challenging. So basically, this topic is going to look at one of the biggest challenges facing any manager, and how do you get someone to do something that you want them to do? And how do you do it in such a way that you're not forcing people, that you lead them in such a way that, you know, everybody wants to go along for the ride and everyone's rah, let's get this done. So leadership is a much studied topic because that's one of the burning questions in business is how do we get everybody to row the boat in the same direction towards the same goal and really get a lot out of it internally doing that, because it's not always easy. So a lot of research has been done. A lot of theories have come up with, and we're going to talk about a few here tonight, just in terms of a broad sense. But I think if you understand some of the challenges, and what we're going to do is look at some of those challenges in terms of what it is that leaders need to do, and how leaders do what they do, and find out basically what you can take away from it to help your leadership in terms of being able to make decisions and being able to lead people in direction. So at its core, good leadership is really achieved with communications. Ultimately, dealing with people is all about communications. How do you talk to someone? How do you listen to someone? Listening is probably 2/3 of the issue. Talking is 1/3 of the issue. So communications is what we're looking at tonight. And from there, we're going to take it and we're going to take that communications and say, okay, how do we use that to make good decisions? And those good decisions are wrapped up in an appreciation for what other people's needs are and how do we fulfill other people's needs. So this is a topic that has as much to do with psychology as anything else. So if we look at leaders first, we look at this concept of what a leader is, who are leaders, some examples, and then this whole idea of leadership. How do people lead? And if you think about leaders, right? I always think, I've met a couple of these folks. The other fella died just as I was being born, so I missed him. But these folks, I don't know if you recognize them. Some of them will certainly be recognizable to you. The guy up in the top left corner, that's Winston Churchill. He was the British Prime Minister during World War II. He was an old curmudgeon. He loved to drink. He was, could be a real pain in the butt. But you know what? As a leader, he is considered to be one of the world's most effective leaders at the time that he led. The guy below him is a guy by the name of Clive Beddoe. Now, Clive Beddoe is a businessman, but an entrepreneur. And he's not a tradesperson, but he did something that was very, very tradesy. And I saw him speak out in Calgary one time. And he basically, what he did, he came up with this silly idea with two other guys, or three of them. This silly idea to start an airline. And he started a little company called WestJet in 1996. And WestJet, everybody told him that it will never work because airlines don't make any money. And that you're going to go bankrupt. So they like they did, said, we don't care. We're going to do it anyway. We're going to do it anyway, but we're going to do it differently. We're going to treat people better. And, WestJet has been very successful. The guy on the far right, you probably recognize from television, is the guy Mike Holmes. He's a Canadian. He is not only a contractor tradesman, he's also a TV personality. And he owns and runs a bunch of companies. And probably one that he's most famous for in the trades business is his philanthropical work with regards to promoting the trades. So they could be considered leaders, each in different fields, but they have something in common. So I just wanted to kind of show you. When I think of Winston Churchill, back in 1942, 3, 4, it didn't look very good for Britain. If you know anything about history at all, World War II involved Germany, which is across the channel. Britain, like Newfoundland, is a little island off the coast of Europe. And to the right of it, there's Europe, the Europe mainland. And one of the countries that's there is Germany. And Germany was a very large military power through the 1930s and 40s. And they had this guy, Adolf Hitler, became the leader. He was a dictatorial leader who led Germany into World War II. And their goal was really to take over Europe or to take over the world with a Nazi type of approach that really was not what we would consider a good way to live. So here they are in 1943. A lot of Europe has fallen to the Germans. And Britain, that little island off the coast, just, it was like Newfoundland versus Nova Scotia. Even closer. But that was just an island in a sea of German-run countries. And he got up in the House of Commons and he made this very famous speech. And part of the speech, you will hear quoted again and again. He said, "We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and the oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight in the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." Churchill made that speech, and it really was a rallying cry to Britain and all the people, particularly those in London, who were having a bomb. They were the bombs are falling out of the sky. It was not looking good. And he really rallied the British people and the people in England to say, we're going to stand up. We're going to stand up to Hitler and we're going to win. And as it was, we're not speaking German today. The British, with a lot of help from Canada, the United States, and all these countries over here, what we call the free world now, really push back on that German invasion, and we won the war. And Churchill was really considered to be one of the linchpins in that, in terms of leading people and giving people confidence that there was a better day ahead and that we could survive it, despite all the odds. If you think about Mike Holmes, Mike started his philanthropical organization to encourage the trades. And, he said, when I first started down the road more than 30 years ago, one of my goals was to change the way people thought about skilled trades. I wanted people to feel proud of what they said they worked at as welders, framers, plumbers, carpenters, or electricians. I wanted them to be proud of the skill that they brought to their craft. And I'm beginning to see this more and more. Now, he's absolutely right, because if you look across Canada right now, where are the skilled shortages? In the trades. Very big skilled shortages in the trades, and pipelines and things and houses and cars and everything else don't get built unless people with skills know how to make it. So Holmes is really kind of driven home, and he's being a real leader, particularly in Canada, with regards to promoting the trades as an option, because this idea of someone having to go to university was really kind of held up for many, many years. It was the second choice. Now he's saying, no, this is the first choice. And a lot of people are there backing him up to prove it, to say it is the first choice, particularly in the environment we live in right now with regards to the shortage of skilled labor. And again, I mentioned Clive Beddoe. Now, Clive Beddoe has nothing to do with any of the other two, but his thoughts on people and the idea that people can be brought forward with a goal, with an image in mind, if it's articulated properly. You know, we need to focus our energies as leaders and educators on the imperative of integrity, honesty, integrity, doing right by people, living by your word. You make a commitment, you live by it. Clive also credits curiosity as for his key success. Curiosity is probably one of the most important traits. I'm always curious, trying to understand how things work and why they work. When it comes to education, he said, I think one of the most important attributes that a young person can have is to be curious. As questions, understand, learn. But education is just a starting point. It's how you apply it that matters at the end of the day. Okay? And he, if you ever get a chance to see him, if he comes to Newfoundland, and every once in a while I've seen him on circuit, he is well worth seeing. And in terms of the story of how he took this silly idea of starting an airline and moving it to where it has become today. And his real thought as a manager in the importance of people and the idea of harnessing people's skills. So each of those leaders, really, that's the thing that ties them all together. They had a faith in people and to move people forward and to achieve goals based on that. And really, ultimately, that's what leadership is all about. People. It's about motivating people. And if we think about what makes a good leader, all of the things that were talked about, integrity, being honest, clear goals. Everybody has to understand where we're going. Which way is the boat going? You know, if we're all rowing the boat, which way is the boat going? Being a good example to people, live by your word, as Clive Beddoe pointed out. Vision, as Churchill showed, you know, we can defend our island. We can never surrender. Clear communication. Churchill said one time, one lady, this is one of these stories. There's all kinds of anecdotes about Winston Churchill. Churchill was a bit of a drinker. And this lady said to him one time, Mr. Churchill, you're drunk. He said, I might be drunk, but in the morning I'll be sober. He said, but you'll still be ugly. Probably not the most politically correct person, but certainly he could articulate things, simple stuff for people so that they clearly understand and make a point very easily. Good leaders expect the best, managed expectations. They rely on the people who work for them to do it well. Nothing wrong with expecting the best. They give support. They're there, and we'll talk about this next week, about the idea of how leaders, they play an important role in helping people achieve these goals by supporting them, not by whipping them, but by supporting them. And support and encouragement really go hand in hand. Another issue that we're going to look at next week is the idea of recognition. If someone does a really good job, it always is helpful to recognize them for it. Leadership is all about giving recognition where recognition is due. Providing stimulating work. Focus on the team interest. We'll look at teams next week, but, teams. How can we all work together to achieve a common goal? And being inspirational. And as I say, people like Churchill and people like Clive Beddoe and people like Mike Holmes, they have been inspirational to their respective generations. And those qualities, I should say, those qualities tend to be what we see whenever we want to describe leadership. There's no real pat, this is what, this is the simple response to this is what a leader is. A leader has these qualities, and all that encompasses good leadership. This is a little meme that I've seen that really encompasses to what people generally think about leadership. If without a background in the theory to it, you think, well, leadership is about being a boss. And here's the example of the boss. The boss is sitting on the cart. And he's pushing people to say, go further, drag me ahead, do this, do that. Whereas a leader is up there with the team to achieve the same goal. Let's move the cart ahead. The leader is someone who's out in front, probably pointing the way, but working equally as hard with the team members to achieve what needs to be done. So leadership is very different than being a boss. A boss represents pushing people, whereas a leader takes people along with them. So formally, if we had to think about it, it's the influence that a particular individual has on the goal achievement of others in an organizational context. So we need to get a job done. We work in a place and we need to get a job done. Okay, that's not uncommon. Well, a leader is someone who says, who can motivate the team, the individuals, to exert effort towards achieving the goal of getting that job done. That's really a good sign. That's really a sign of a good leader, is someone who can do that. So leaders lead others. Specifically, the role of leader can probably be spoken of really in terms of three major competencies. So if you had to ask yourself, what is it that a leader needs in order to be a good leader? We've seen some of the attributes of a leader. What are some of the things? Well, if you boil all that down, you can boil it down into really three major core competencies, which are really the things that you need to know as an individual. Three competencies that make them good leaders and people will want to follow them. The first one deals with the idea of being able to take in information, process it. So from a communications point of view, that's called listening in plain language. And the communication, which you could see as someone speaking or relaying it along. So information processing and communication is absolutely essential. You have to be able to take it in, figure it out, and communicate it. Another key component or a key competency that a leader has is being able to make a decision. Some people just can't make decisions. I could go this way, I could go that way. I'm too busy thinking of what we call paralysis by analysis. We can work the problem to death, but never make a decision. Decision making involves making decisions. They may not be right. In fact, it could be a wrong decision. But the fact of the matter is, the focus is on making the decision based on a bunch of information that you collected. That's important, to be able to make the decision. What's not necessarily important is if the decision is wrong. The fact is, you made the decision based on the best available information you had. And the third element, the third key competency, is dealing with people, that people management role. How can you be a good people person? What are some of the people management issues that you need to concern yourself with? So over the next couple of nights, we're going to look at those. Tonight, I'm going to focus primarily on the first one, information processing and communication. That's really the core one. If you had to say, are all of them three equal? Information processing and communication encompasses a lot of the other ones with it, okay? So if we think about information processing, we think about what that is. In order to get information to start with, any information, anyhow, it doesn't matter where you got it, you read it, saw it, it fell on you, doesn't matter. It had to come to you somehow. You had to internalize it in your brain. How did you do that? Well, a lot of work has been done in this field, and the best concept for how communication works has boiled down to a diagram like this. Okay? This is what we consider the universal concept of the communication process. So if you look at any textbook or anywhere online and you type in Google the communication process, it would come up with this basic concept. It might look a little bit different, but the basic concept involves one end of the spectrum and another end of the spectrum and some stuff in between. Okay? The first end of the spectrum, if we want to look at the left-hand side here, we'll assume that this is the source. Now, let's assume someone is speaking. Okay, let's assume someone is speaking. That would be the source. The source would be speaking with a message. So they would say it is 7:25 in the evening. Okay, so that would be the basic message that came from the source. So there it is going through there. In order, I'm just going to hop over to the other side now. The receiver hears that message. It's 7:25 in the evening. Okay? So you heard that message. You know that it's 7:25. Now, there's a lot of stuff that happens in between all that. There's a lot of stuff that happens in between. Let's go back over here again. I said it was 7:25, probably gotten to 7:26 now. In order to say that, I've got, let's just look. I'm opening my mouth here. It's sending out sound waves, right? This thingamajobber here, this microphone, is taking those sound waves and converting them into an electric signal. There's a little, like a drum inside it. I picked this apart. So there's a little drum outfit in here that converts the signals into an electric pulse, hence the wire. That wire goes into my computer, and magically, I don't understand the magic part, so I'll just say magically, it gets sent through the internet. Okay? And the internet would be considered what we call a channel. It is how the information flows. In this case, we're doing it electronically. It moves through the channel. That message is coming into your computer, no matter where you are, and the way the internet works, where you are is really irrelevant now, right? No matter where you are, that comes into your computer. Your computer takes those zeros and ones that went through the internet system, the computer system. It's all binary, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. It takes it, and it is doing something with it inside that turns it into an electric signal that goes out to your speaker or your headphones and creates sound waves with it so you can hear me speak. That process is known as decoding. It takes that electronic signal and decodes it into a basically an electronic that causes sound waves in the speaker. Now, your brain is also the decoder because you're hearing this. Now, if I spoke in French or Chinese or something like that, that decoding wouldn't work because if you don't understand French or you don't understand Chinese, and it wouldn't work on my end either because I don't understand French or Chinese. So really, my encoding would be no good because it would be just a bunch of gibberish, right? So this internal part of the source to the receiver is where problems come in the communication process. If I don't speak clearly, if I don't speak the proper language, if my encoding device goes awry, you know, if I unplug it, for example, I won't unplug it because I might never be able to plug it back in. Those things cause problems in the communication process. The encoding gets mixed up, or the internet goes down, the channel gets destroyed, or your speakers don't work, the decoding. These are where problems happen inside of this communication process. Further to that, and I really don't have it here in the diagram. Let's say, for example, the encoding system is working perfectly. Okay. Let's say, for example, I said to you, okay, think about it. We're in Clarenville. We're in Clarenville now, and we're going to go down to Port Rexton. Okay. So I'm telling you a story about how we can drive from Clarenville to Port Rexton, and it's a 45-minute drive. Got to go down the Bonavista Vista Highway. We got to turn right at the intersection of Port Rexton. We go down there, and there's a brewery down there. You can go down to the brewery and have a beer. You can go down and walk on the beach. There's giant chairs down there. I'm telling you all those wonderful things. The thing is, I know that because I've been there. I cannot say for certain, though, that the rest of you have. Now, if you have, and you can relate to it, your decoding is working fine, isn't it? Because you understand what I'm saying. You say, okay, I have an idea where Port Rexton is. I have an idea about turning right. I have an idea about the brewery. I've been there. Oh, yeah, I know it. Yeah, okay, I've been down on the beach. Yeah, okay, know that. So the decoding process is working for you. However, if you've never been down there, what I just said about turning right and going down the Bonavista Vista Highway and going into, that's nice to know, but I don't have a clue what you're talking about. Okay? So the decoding process really only works if you have an idea of what is being talked about, meaning that your, what we call the field of experience, has to be the same as mine. If I'm telling you something I'm familiar with and you're not familiar with it, that decoding process is not going to work. And this is where sometimes communication breaks down. You know how you're talking to someone and they're telling you a story and they say, oh yeah, John, you know John. No, don't have a clue who you're talking about. Well, you know, if you can't relate to who John is and the story involves knowing who John is, the story doesn't mean anything to you, right? So as a leader and as a manager, we have to be clear in our own minds before we open our mouth, being the source, that everybody who's receiving this message is familiar with what we're talking about. If you got a new piece of equipment that came into the shop and you're talking about a piece of equipment that's in the shop, yet nobody is aware that that piece of equipment is in the shop, it's not going to make a lot of sense to people, right? So we need to have, when we're doing this communication process, the source has to be aware that the message has to be relevant to the people who are receiving it. They have to be able to have the same field of experience. They're familiar with the piece of equipment. So if we're out talking and there's the piece of equipment right in front of us, we're talking face to face, that decoding process works so much better than if we're online like we're doing now and you have no idea what piece of equipment we're talking about. Right? So good leaders need to be aware that of this process and understand where the process can break down. The encoding, was your message clear? Could they understand it? Was it loud enough? Was it too soft? Was it not the right whatever? Was the channel any good? Was the communication line very good? You know, is the phone line working? Can you read my writing if I'm writing it? These sorts of things. And the decoding, you know, do you have your glasses? Can you pick that out? Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you have your hearing aid in if you're deaf? You know, these sorts of things that come into play. We also have this very important thing called feedback. Let's just look at now. You know, if we were in a classroom, and this is what I miss about the classroom. If we were in a classroom and we were all sat around here talking, I would have a good understanding of how you're understanding this. Do you understand? I'd look at the expression on your face. You could be asleep. I could say, well, it's not that interesting to you. And I know you're asleep. Right now, you're out there. I have no idea where you are. I have no idea if you understand it. So it's very poor. Under this system that we're using here, my communication feedback loop is not very good. And that's a problem with this type of technology, is we do not have good feedback on it. Face-to-face is a much better feedback. Communication works so much better face-to-face because you can see people's body language. You can see their facial expressions. You can see if they understand what you're talking about. They can ask questions so much easier. They're looking at the piece of equipment that we're talking about. So these things work better. Feedback has to be part of a good, full communication process. So one of the things that we need to do as managers and as leaders is to make sure that we are open to listening to issues and concerns and allowing for that feedback loop to work. So with an understanding of how this theory of communication works, it makes it so much easier for leaders to lead because they understand that, we need to be clear. We need to worry about the channel we're going through. We need to worry about, can people easily decode what I'm talking about? Do they understand what I'm talking about? In other words, is there room for feedback? Any questions on that? So the takeaways, lots of research has been done into this. Lots of research. This basic theory has been beaten around for years. But a lot of the questions have been asked on how can we improve it? What can we do to make this process work better? Well, a lot of research has been done, and these are the things that stand out. In order to make that communication work better, what we need is something called, first and foremost, active listening. Now, active listening is when the receiver says, I am interested in hearing what that person has to say. Or, that interests me, I want to find out more. Or, I need to be able to provide that person with feedback because I didn't understand what they said. I need to make sure my speakers are turned up, or I need to be paying attention. So active listening is really about paying close attention to what the sender is saying. Now, you could do all that. You can listen really well, but if you say, this is a bunch of malarkey, or that person doesn't know what he's talking about, or I'm dreaming about my vacation in Florida. Those things tend to interfere with the communication process. One of the first things is this idea of, is this person someone I can listen to or want to understand what that person is saying? So part of active listening is being accepting of the other person. You may not like what they have to say to you. And that shuts down, right? Oh, I don't want to listen to you. I don't like what you're saying. I disagree with what you're saying, or, it's not making any sense to me. Well, that destroys the communication process. So accepting what the person said. So if you're the boss and someone comes to you and says, I can't work these hours. I don't like this. It's not good for me. If you're saying, I don't care, I'll get someone else to do it. Well, that's not accepting of the other person. You have to understand where they are coming from. It's the old put yourself in the other person's shoes perspective, okay? So that's being acceptant. Empathy is really important about that. And empathy is having appreciation for the fact that it's a real person out there as opposed to a machine. A lot of people look at workers as machines, no different than a tractor, no different than a shovel. Get the job done. I don't care about you. That's not going to work. As a leader, you have to appreciate that that person's a person and that that person has needs, interests, and the like that may not necessarily line up with yours. A big one that comes up whenever you run into these problems is confusing the person with the problem. People can have problems at work. And the thing is it a person issue or is it a work issue? And oftentimes, oh, that person's just a complainer. Well, that's really confusing the person with the problem. The problem could be very legitimate. I don't want to work those type of hours. That's legitimate. And what you do is you take it out on the person. That's not a good way to lead. You need to be able to separate the individual from the problem that the individual is facing and appreciate where the person is coming from with it. To say what you feel is got to be close, it got to be carefully done, but you need to be able to say, don't tell people what they want to hear. Oh yeah, I'll do that for you, no sweat. Yeah. When really you're thinking, no, that's a little bit inconvenient for me. You need to be able to say it in such a way that it doesn't offend them. But the fact of the matter is, if you have a legitimate concern, that should be expressed. And part and parcel of say what you feel is another thing that comes into play is body language. Be sure your words, thoughts, feelings, and actions all are the same. If you're saying to me, oh, I really enjoy this, yet your face says, I hate it, you're sending conflicting signals. So you need to, in terms of active listening, you need to be able to think about what are your thoughts, words, and feelings. Are they lining up with your deeds? Does your face show that you enjoy it? Do you really enjoy it? And you need to give a consistent message. And that's as much as a speaker as a receiver. Another big one that comes into play, good leaders give timely feedback. They don't wait for 6 days to get some feedback to the person. You do a good job. It's important that be conveyed immediately. Speed maximizes the reinforcement potential of a message. Okay. Provide new workers with good orientation. That's a problem in many, many businesses. I know I've been down this road, and I figure you have too. We have this new concept in business called onboarding, where people are actually brought into an organization and welcomed into the organization and brought up to speed on the organization, the rules and the unwritten rules of the organization, long before they're thrown into the job. So a good orientation is very important. That way people can get accustomed and acclimatized to the organization to do a good job. And the problem is with some orientations is all like a fire hose. Shh, here's all this information. Now I'm blasting it at you and you can't take it all in. So an orientation has to take time too, as opposed to a 5-minute orientation. Clearly communicate workers' roles. Everybody got to know what their job is. This goes back to our very first class where we talked about this issue of having clear reporting structures and the like. You know what your role is. Where do you fit in the organization? What's your job? Suitable training. That's a big one too. Safety training in particular. Young people end up in a hospital more often when they go to the workplace. It is the new worker who ends up in the hospital much more than the older person. Because the fact of the matter is that training helps prevent accidents. And people who are not well trained tend to have more accidents. And we need to encourage worker input. Again, part of the communication process, the encourage worker input, is really this feedback loop. So, and whenever possible, involve workers in the decision-making process. Workers who are involved in the decision-making process will buy into the decisions. Okay, so those are some of the things. And again, it's all, it's not rocket science here. It's just, you got to remember to do this sort of stuff. How do we put it in place? How do we actually do it? Hold regular team meetings. A lot of organizations now, I don't know if any of you guys work for organizations that have regular health safety meetings. Do you have a safety meeting in the morning, for example? We get together, you have what's called a toolbox meeting. Does anyone do that? A lot of organizations work for Newfoundland Power. I know Newfoundland Power does it. Every morning they have what's called a toolbox meeting, which has to do more with safety than anything else. But the idea is that it's a regular meeting, meaning that people expect it every day. And that way it's not kind of an ad hoc sort of today, we're not sure, that sort of thing. So regular meetings discuss work challenges within the unit, encourage workers to come up with practical solutions to the issues. Again, it's all part of good communications. Provide regular feedback, like we talked about. Praise workers whenever tasks are done well. and help them whenever tasks aren't done well, as opposed to pointing fingers at them. What can we do in order to improve? Give workers practical advice. And this goes to, as someone becomes a more seasoned employee, their role is to become the trainer then. Part of this involves coaching. Any one of you who get an opportunity to coach other workers, that's a great job skill. Because what it does is it helps improve your communication skills. As you coach someone, if you're responsible for someone at work, say, for example, you got a young journey person come in, a young apprentice come in, your job really involves doing this well. And if you can be, consider the encoding, the channel, how that information is relayed, making sure they understand it, lots of opportunity for feedback. Those are the things that help you become a good coach, to help someone show them the ropes. Personal feedback to a worker in private. Oh my. How often do you ever see someone being chastised in front of everyone else? That doesn't do any good for the person who's being chastised, nor anyone else. Feedback should be given in private. A performance feedback system in your workplace. Again, a system. Having these regular team meetings is an example of a performance feedback system. Having regular worker meetings, one-on-one meetings, is a good feedback system. Encourage workers to talk to their supervisor on a regular basis. That way problems can be solved before it become real problems. And ensuring management structures across the organization, our reporting lines within the work teams are clear. We talked about those organizational structures. Who is your boss? Who do you talk to? Who is the person who's responsible for you? Who is that person responsible to? Instead of jumping queue, you go to your person who talks to another person. That sort of thing. This management structure, these structures that we talked about in the very first class, roles, that's important to follow in order to make sure information flows through the proper channels and everybody gets a full, clear picture. We call it what's called the formal chain of command. And formal chain of command is important in order to allow for good communications to work. There's lots of informal communications, that grapevine, people talking behind one another's backs and that sort of thing. You know how destructive that can be over time. Sometimes we unfortunately, in terms of the communication process, let's go back here. The source got to tell the receiver that this is not the way to do it. This is not right. You're doing it wrong. It's always hard to tell someone something like that. If you're the source and you got to tell someone they did a poor job or they got it screwed up or whatever, nobody likes doing that. So we often couch bad news by doing something in this stage that might muddle the message. We call it filtering. Okay, filtering involves muddling the message by not being clear in order to save someone some grief. Probably yourself or probably the receiver. And filtering can lead to some real problems. It's a tendency for the message to be watered down or stopped altogether at some point during transmission. And filtering works both ways. You don't want to tell the boss because you figure you'll just be considered a complainer. And the boss don't want to tell you because that's not something you want to hear. So to prevent filtering, some organizations have what's called an open door policy. An open door policy is a fancy way of saying, look, go in and talk to the boss anytime. And that boss is not going to be down your throat because of it. Okay? A situation of no blame or a blame-free environment. This has been particularly coming out of the airline industry. It's always easy to blame someone when they make a mistake. It happens. Mistakes happen. You wouldn't be human if mistakes didn't happen. Question is, what can we do to prevent it from happening again? And really, the open door policy is designed to help address errors and make sure they don't happen again, as opposed to punish someone. So managers may also wish to go outside the normal channels of information for broad stuff. When's the Christmas party? Not stuff that deal with, specific issues. But if you don't use the formal chain of command to talk about the Christmas party, that's probably okay. That's not going to hurt anyone. But in terms of work-related material, we really want to focus on that chain of command. Clearly defining roles and expectations up front. Oh man, this is the one that has bugged me forever. If you don't know what's expected of you because someone didn't communicate that, that's going to cause problems for you and is going to cause problems for them. If they didn't tell you exactly what they wanted, there's no way that you're going to live up to being able to live up to that. They're not sure what they want. How are you going to ever satisfy them? Basically, that's the story, right? So we got to be clear in defining roles and expectations up front. So you got to think about it before you ask someone to do something. What's involved here? What do I need done? So this open path communication helps facilitate clear expectations and clear communications. And the time limits of it. There's no sense to tell someone 3 hours time that you need something done 2 hours ago. So the last thing we're looking at tonight is this issue of what type of leader are you? Where do you fit? Okay? Where do you fit? So we'll look at the front end of this tonight, the back end of this next week. You think about where you fit as a leader. We've talked about leadership and what some of the things that leaders need to do in order to do things well. And a lot of research has been done, and the general crux of a lot of research has come up with this sort of thing. That is, there are different leadership styles out there. People have different ways of leading. They're not necessarily, one is not necessarily worse than the other. It's just certain people tend to take a leadership approach that's different than other people. If we put everyone on a line, we could kind of say, yeah, their leadership style fits between one extreme or the other extreme. One extreme is called a task-focused leader. A task-focused leader is, I only want to talk about the job. Here's what we're doing. This is what we need to do. Now get that done. That's a task-focused leader. And you know what? In some environments, a task-focused leader is very, very important. If we got a deadline, if it's an emergency, task focus is very good. That leadership style works very good for that type of environment. Might not work for all environments though, because if you work in an environment that, okay, everybody's clear of their job role and that sort of thing, but nobody's respectful of one another and you don't really care about one another and you're no different than that machine over there, that causes people grief too. So some leaders tend to be saying, oh, I'm really focused on people and make sure people are happy and make sure people are well understood, make sure people are looked after, make sure people are smiling and rosy-faced. Well, in some environments, that might be very good. It might be very good. We want people to respect other people all the time, but, treating them like kids is probably not a good thing either. So leaders tend to fall on one end of the spectrum or the other, task-focused or people-focused. Nobody's purely one or the other. It's just somewhere along this, what we call a continuum, somewhere along here. So the question is, what leader is best? And the answer is neither. Leadership is largely dependent on the situation that someone finds themselves in. So in some situations, this type of approach, the task-focused is better. In some situations, the people-focused is better. It really depends. Fortunately, leaders are not necessarily sitting on one side of the fence or the other. They're somewhere in the middle. The question is, how far are they from one extreme or the other? If a leader tends to be on this side of the continuum, that is very, very, very task focused. We call them, or they're often called, authoritarian type leaders. And the task focused leaders tend to describe themselves as authoritarian. You do this now is the authoritarian type leader, okay? They use their authority, their power, to force people to do things. Now, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to work for that type of leader. Okay, so an authoritarian leader is not something we really aspire to. But hang on a second now. Let's assume we had an emergency. We're in the military. It's an emergency, and this needs to be done or people are going to die. Do you think a more authoritarian leader might be better in that situation? Where, okay, we got a very important task to do. It needs to be done or people are going to die. That leader might be a very good leader at knowing what needs to be done and how to do it. And if they are, they can get people lined up to do the job. If you're in the fire department and you got a fire burning, it's not time to be focused on, well, making sure people's feelings are very concerned about that sort of thing. We got a job to do that is based on time. So some situations, the authoritarian leader might be better, but not very many. A leader that sits in the middle, which is where most people find themselves, is something called a participative leader. A participative leader is a more democratic, offers guidance, participates with the group, allows input for the members in order to get the job done. So there's elements of people and there's elements of task. Most leaders will fall somewhere in this category. Again, if it's an emergency situation, is a participative leader type of person the best person? Possibly not. Because again, those types of democratic concepts of what do you think? What do you think? We really don't have a lot of time for that when the job is an emergency. The other end of the extreme is someone who's a super duper nice person and they don't lead at all. They more or less let people do their jobs. They're called a delegate of leaders, laissez-faire, which is a French word for hands off. That's all that means. They don't give a lot of guidance to the group. Now you say, well, is that really a good idea? Well, it depends on the group. Okay, you're a professional. Look, you know your trade. What if I came in and said, well, you go do that now. Here's how to do that. Well, you wouldn't think very much of me. You know your job. You're an expert. You know your job. I don't need to tell you how to do your job, right? So if we've got a highly skilled workforce that know their job, know the task to be done, they have a clear goal, a delegate leader might work for that type of environment. However, if you got an unskilled workforce that don't know what they're doing and really need to have hand-holding in order to do their job, probably a delegate of leadership is not going to work there. Okay, so leaders tend to fall in, as I say, to one of those three basic broad categories. What we're going to look at next week is we're going to look at this, what's your leadership style? So I want you to give some reading to that during this week. And we're going to look at Lewin's leadership style. And we're basically going to figure out where you sit. Now, the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to do it in class, go through it. And as one of the projects within this section, I'm asking you to do it for yourself, okay? And it's an online thing. So you take a look at that, and you'll kind of get a sense of where you sit along this continuum, where you as a leader would see yourself, one side or the other, or somewhere in the middle. Next week, we're going to take a look at that, and we're also going to talk about some of the issues with regards to teams and coaching and things that leaders can do in order to help the organization move along even further. And I'll call it some of the popular things that we see out there in leadership environments that are considered as good leadership environments and successful companies and that sort of thing.